Hello everybody. Today I'm going to do a video where I'm going to talk about the English version of The Dark Eye, TDE, Das Schwarze Auge, in English is The Dark Eye, TDE. And the reason why I'm talking about this is that I had been playing TDE when I was a child in the 80s. Then we moved on to, well, we also played Dungeons and Dragons. We moved on to Call of Cthulhu, and then, you know, as I went to university, you know, there were fewer people interested in this kind of thing. Then I moved to Ireland, and I didn't have a group to play with for the first 7 years, so I did some online role playing back then. It was mainly play by forum, although Skype, I think, existed as early as 2005. There wasn't really that much of a community, or not so many people had strong enough internet to actually support synchronous online gaming. But then, of course, I found a group and we've played lots of things. And then a couple of years ago, DSA 5 was announced, and 2015, and they basically had a Kickstarter for an English version. There had been an English version produced earlier, and I don't think it was DSA 4.1, I think it may have been DSA 3, and but that really didn't sell. So they made a concerted effort. It was a Kickstarter, and they produced the rules in English, and they actually went to great lengths. There is a very interesting video on YouTube. It's entirely in German, and if I can find a link, I will link to it in the description of this video, where I forget his name. Is it Markus Plötz? I'm not sure. Talks for about an hour about the localization of Das Schwarze Auge into English, you know, how they made changes, what kind of changes they made, how the process works, that they have an in-house translator in Germany who is German and is a translator, German-English, translates it into English. Then it gets sent to specialists in the United States who are also translators, and then they will do a localization of the already existing translation, which I think is an amazing way of doing this. I mean, I know a lot about translation. And when I watched that video, I was very fascinated because, sorry, I have to get a drink. Sorry about that. So essentially, he explained, for example, that it's not just enough to translate the text, but the localization would come with regard to terms such as black pelt and red pelt. Black pelts are the orcs, and red pelts are the goblins, but you can't use this because black pelt would be associated with black people, and red pelt could be associated with Native Americans, so they had to change those terms, and I think now they're ash pelts and rust pelts. But they also had to change the imagery because there are plenty of women who are not clothed from the waist up, and of course you can't have that in the United States apparently without you know, running the risk of a lawsuit. So they had to take care of all of this, but they went to great lengths, and he explains it in a 60-minute video, which I thought was very, very interesting, entertaining, and also quite insightful. And now it's 2019, and I just have to say, DSA, but also TDE, where are you headed? When I checked the website of Ulisses, where the English website, I think if I counted correctly, they had 38 articles, so items, for The Dark Eye in English. The core rule set, obviously. The almanac, I only have the German version, that's why I can't show it to you. The bestiary, the first bestiary, the compendium, I know this because I've seen it in English as well, but then also items that I consider superfluous. Obviously easy to localize. A dice set, you don't really have to localize the dice set, so you can actually just offer this. But you don't need them. You don't need a special DSA TDE dice set. You can just take any random D20s, and it helps if they are different colors, but even that isn't required. You could even play with just one. Anyway, and they've got, I think, the Warring Kingdoms, a translation of the source book. They've got a translation of the, I want to say, the Siebenwindküste. I'm not sure, actually, if I've seen that. So since this came out, both in German and in English, 4 years ago at this stage, they've produced 2 source books. That's appalling. And I'll come to that. But what I perceive in English is a total lack of the thing that is most important next to the rules, and that is adventures. Most people, let's face it, find it difficult to find a DM to begin with. There is no doubt that there are fewer people who want to DM, and especially DM all the time to cater for all the people who would like to play. Most people don't want to DM because it's hard work. It also requires a financial contribution, more or less, because you need to buy more books and so on and so forth. So being a DM is actually quite costly, I can tell you that. And any DM who's really, you know, going to use pre-made stuff, and most people are, but even basic rule books are very expensive. I mean, the DM guide for 5th edition D&D in Germany costs 50 euros. It's way more expensive than the English version. Way more expensive. Anyway, so it is quite a lot of money that you have to invest. So, and it's also quite a lot of time that you have to invest. Even when you have a pre-published adventure like this one here, you still have to do stuff. You have to print your, you know, depending on the quality of the adventure. And I've chosen these 2 because the quality is actually appallingly bad. You have to do quite a lot of work. You may even have to spend a lot of money of your own to, for example, print handouts. These are the handouts for the game. I don't understand what they think you're going to do. Cut up your book and show it to people and hand it to people. This is the map. Come on. I mean, this is another handout. Are you supposed to cut up the book? So, you know, you would have to copy them. You'd have to scan them, print them off, blah, blah, blah. But you can always say, okay, people can make their own adventures. That's true. However, DSA isn't that kind of game. Number one, there is no challenge rating for the monsters. So if you have no idea of DSA, you're new, you're English speaking, you don't have access to any of the German stuff that you can still get or that you can get in PDF form, you're left with the basic rule set, which doesn't really help you. There are hardly any monsters in there, and of course that is because DSA isn't monster driven. It's not D&D. DSA lives and dies with people penetrating its world and understanding the millennia and eons of history that go before and how this has all influenced the metaplot of 1041 BF that we're in now. I think it's 1041. Let me just check. This one is, yeah, it's 1042, sorry, my mistake. So, but the problem is you don't have access to any of this history if you're not a German speaker, because I showed you the Historia Aventurica, which clocks in at, I think, 345 pages. This is the Aventurian Almanac, and let's just leave out this bestiary, which is ridiculous. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 opponents, 4 human opponents, but I mean, better than nothing. It clocks in at 258 pages. And in those pages you have your content, table of contents, you have a useless map, and you have plenty of text, that's great, but you also have stuff that's, you know, kind of you know, selected illnesses. You know, it is a very, very interesting book, and it gives you quite a lot of stuff to read. It has every so often really nice pictures. For example, this is a really lovely one. But This is the condensed version, which is both supposed to be the history and the world itself. By comparison, when we look at Splittermond, the whole world book has over 200 pages. And it has additional source books for its different regions that are coming out. So one could say, okay, that's fine, because they will probably provide all of this world information in the adventures. Now, this is one adventure path which consists of 2 chapters. There are only these 2 books. It is set in the Sveitland and the Orkland. 2 very interesting places. 2 places for which in DSA 4.1 you get a whole book. I don't have the book, I just have the PDF. I haven't printed it off and bound it yet, but this is pretty much the size that we're looking at. 200 plus pages. The source book that comes as a region description for the region that this is set in is 240 pages. It doesn't exist anymore for DSA 5. It has not been reprinted. I have not been able to get a copy. If somebody would like to sell theirs, let me know. I'm going to pay. I only have the PDF. I am going to print it off. I am going to bind it. I'm going to print off every single PDF for DSA 4 that I have, and I'm going to bind them all because they're really good books. They're really excellently written, and they're just great reads. And if you want to get immersed in the world, you really need that background information. So you as a DM are left with these 2 books, a really crappy map, an even crappier map, some stuff at the back, no description that is worth its salt, and then the Aventurian Almanac. And when I look at the relevant places that I just described and talked to you about, we have Sveitland. We're just gonna check this out so that I don't lie to you. Svältischer Städtebund, Svelttal, 48. Auckland and Svelttal. The description starts here and ends here. And there's a picture that goes with it. So we're talking about, and here's a description for what a hero coming from this region would be like. So that's not even a description of the region itself. So we're looking at, if we're really gracious, one A4 page, as opposed to 240 pages that are available for DSA 4.1. So DSA is very much different from Pathfinder or D&D, where building your own adventure is very straightforward. You have your Dungeon Master's Guide, you've got a bestiary, you have challenge ratings for your monsters, which is completely absent in DSA. There are no challenge ratings. You have no way of knowing how dangerous something is going to be or how to put together a good encounter. And not only have I suffered from this, because I followed the instructions in the actual adventure path, which basically I had almost constantly TPKs. I really had to fudge my rolls, which I hate. But I also experienced this as a player where somebody was actually following the suggestions and it didn't work out at all. It was disastrous. We nearly died twice. And when I brought this up in a community, they were like, oh yeah, you have to use your gut feeling. And I'm like, no, that's not good enough. Especially if you're trying to entice people to go to a very different system that is totally different from D&D and possibly a lot more bookkeeping heavy and dice heavy. And when I say dice heavy, I don't mean a dice fest like World of Darkness where you can end up chucking 12 D10s, but it's still easy to find out if you succeeded and if you failed and how well or badly you failed or succeeded. No, it's a lot more difficult. Some say it's a very German role-playing game, and I would say it is like a Euro game, if we're talking board games, and D&D is the Ameritrash version. I don't like the term Ameritrash. It's a term that's used widely in the community, also by Americans, might I add. But I think it kind of is very disrespectful, because a lot of these games I have in my own possession of these Ameritrash games, and they are really, really good games, you know. But you could say that this is probably more like a Euro, and D&D is more like Ameritrash. So you're trying to enter a market that is completely saturated with fantasy role-playing games to choose from. D&D and Pathfinder, but then there are so many others. There is Dragon Age, very dark fantasy. There is The One Ring for those people who would like to play Tolkien-based stories. You know, all available in English, written in English to begin with. You know, you have all of this, and then you're trying to come along and sell this. It's completely dependent on people understanding and penetrating the world. Then you present the world in this fashion, where all of the information is condensed in such a way that it is totally impossible to come up with atmospheric descriptions even for this. You know, you can't really do anything yourself, because you don't have any information that is relevant for you as a dungeon master to write these yourself. So what you have to do is you have to rely on pre-written, published adventures. The problem is, in English, there hardly aren't any. This adventure path has not been translated at all, considering that I think it's actually very badly written. That's probably a good thing, because it might turn people off completely. But then there is the so-called Theatre Nights campaign, which is set in the Bornland and has 6 chapters, 6 individual books like this, each clocking in at about 60 pages. They translated the first 2 and then stopped. What's that supposed to do? I mean, of course, this was written in such a way that you can play individual chapters and not play the whole arc, which I think, and I'm not the only one, think led to some issues with the whole arc, because when you do this, of course, the whole thing becomes a little bit a little less cohesive and a little less coherent, because otherwise you can't really take the different chapters out. But it's still playable. It's still enjoyable. Of course, you have weaknesses and you have strengths, like you have in the. I mean, I did a review of the Uturia campaign, Grüne Hölle, where you have a lot of weak points, but you also have a lot of strong points. And if you just put in the time and use, for example, Al-Anfa the Forest of Meridiana as a background, you can actually turn this into a really, really nice campaign. But, you know, as an English speaker, you don't have any of this at your disposal. So the number of translated adventures is ridiculously small, which is also why I believe TDE isn't going to make it. This is my prediction. I don't think that TDE has a future. I would also say that it's a little bit in a crisis in German. And I wasn't as aware of this in the past as I am now. Because I wasn't really following the discussion about the different editions. I mean, there's an edition war going on, but that's the same with D&D. And I think that there will probably be an edition war for Pathfinder as well, because Pathfinder 2nd edition is coming out, I believe, this year. And I think that's normal, because whenever you make a change to something that people have invested in and that people may have already invested in a lot of time and money, I mean, one of these costs 35 euros. If you've got all of them, you've probably, and if you've got all of them, if you've got all of the adventure books, if you've got all of the source books, etc., you've probably spent 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 euros, possibly. They're also seemingly repeating some of the issues that they had run into with DSA 4.1. by, for example, adding more and more and more additional books to describe magic. So I think we're now at magic number 3, in addition to the basic rule book. One book about the gods, which had to come out because for some reason in the basic rule book they omitted half the pantheon, which is totally ridiculous, but hey, who knows what they were thinking. And then they've started to do something which they've called Rustkammern. I think it's armory in English. I think one has been translated, where they basically put in additional weapons and detailed descriptions and focus rules and blah, blah, blah. So now they're going again down this road of, oh, we can be so complicated. And if somebody says, oh yeah, prestige classes, and then DSA goes, hold my beer, because they can do it even more detailed. And so that we now also see this proliferation of books which are, in my opinion, non-core, which probably only appeal to a very small number of players, because, you know, I'm playing in numerous online games now, and I'm just putting together a group at the moment, and everybody's like, is it enough if I just have the basic rule book, because I don't really want to buy this, and I'm like, no, you're grand. Just buy the basic rule book or get the basic rule book, even as a PDF. These are the rules by which I will play. If you decide to go down focus rule routes to level 3, I'm not with you. We will not go down the focus rules for hunting, for example. There's a video on how these work, and it was put out by Ulysses, and I'm like, no. If you want to play a simulation, that's great. You can still do it in DSA 5, but that's definitely not my playstyle. But now they're catering towards this segment, and it's probably not the biggest segment of players, but still, be that as it may, because as a German speaker, you can still get the old source books as PDFs. So it's a lot easier for you to do your own adventure building, because you have access to all of their source material, which is vitally important, because unlike Dungeons and Dragons, where you can say, okay, well, we just romp around some fantasy world, because there is no meta plot. And I'm not saying that they don't have world building, because they do have world building, and there are source books that describe the different worlds. But since there is no meta plot, you can just basically make this up as you go. The things that you need are basically your challenges. And for this, you have a very good bestiary, or even 7, and with the challenge rating. So building encounters, and I've done this myself, for D&D is a lot easier than it is for DSA, especially since DSA has very, very few white spaces, because everything is plastered over with the meta plot. And if you decide to do something, you go to a city, you read the description, you come into contact with someone, and for some reason they die, or something happens to them due to your players' actions, and then you pick up one of those pre-published adventures, and then suddenly this person comes up again. You're kind of like, what am I doing now? Because they were important, and this is why they have this marking scheme where they say, okay, somebody, depending on who they are, gets a rating. Each person gets a rating. So, and they use chess figures for this, and I don't think you can see this because it's quite small. And if it's just a pawn, then you can do with them what you like. And if it's something else, then, you know, if it's, for example, a queen symbol, then it means that this is a person that will come up again in the meta plot, and you cannot, under any circumstances, kill them. Which also led to the really weird storyline in Donnerwacht, where it said, well, your players will probably not want this person to survive, or this person must survive at all costs. So here are ways to just basically spirit them away so that they don't die. And you kind of go, yeah, if that's not railroading, I don't know what is. But anyways, since there are so few white spaces, even for experienced people who have been playing DSA for a very long time and know every single thing that ever happened in the Duchy of Weiden, ever since Weiden became a duchy, will find it more difficult to come up with their own storylines, completely separate from the published works, than somebody who is English speaking and has no access to any of this. So you have to rely on these pre-published adventures, and since there are so few in English, I think their translation policy to translate source books, for example, for the Warring Kingdoms, without actually releasing relevant adventures in English, is a totally misguided policy. And the strategy behind it is completely enigmatic, in my opinion. The same goes also for German. We have so far got 2 adventure paths. One is a 2-part adventure path, for which we don't have a source book. And the other one, the Bornland Theatre Night campaign, is 6 adventure books long. For this is also a source book available for DSA 4.1, but you know, it's no longer available. You can't buy it anymore. I tried. If somebody's got it, please let me know. So I've only got the PDF. But even for the Bornland campaign, which if you take the books and you really have a role-playing based group, it can take you years to play it. It can take you years. There is no source book available for DSA 5. None. Instead, they made a Havina one, they made a Warring Kingdoms one, and they made a Siebenwindküste one. I don't understand why. I'm pretty sure that, you know, there must be a reason, but the reason is one that people are puzzled by. So, and I'm not sure where even DSA 5 in German is headed. I was unaware of the amount of people who still play DSA 4. Like I said, I'm trying to put together a group at the moment to play the Uturia campaign, which of course is DSA 4.1. So the storyline is DSA 4.1, but I'm using DSA 5 rules, which is not a problem. I myself was fortunate enough to be invited to play in a DSA 4.1 role-playing round, which was even streamed. And I realized that, you know, it's actually possible to play. You know, if you don't know the rules, but if you just get the rule book and just look even at the parts that are relevant for you at the moment. You know, don't read the whole book, but you know, I've made an ordained one of Pereine, so I just read the relevant information there. You're good to go. It's not that complex, it's not that different from DSA 5. DSA 4 is still widely played, possibly also because there are so few adventures for DSA 5 available, although DSA 5 is now 4 years old. And there is also no information to be had what they're planning on releasing next, because the source books, the regional source books that they are releasing or have released, have nothing to do with where their adventures are going. They're completely, I mean, there is one, maybe 2 adventures set in Havana. One is a solo one, and I'm not sure about the other one. I think there are 2. So we've got one book, one Havana book, which I showed on this channel, for one adventure. That's great, but you know, again, why did they choose this? Well, it was done through Kickstarter. So they probably felt that this was going to draw a lot of attention and a lot of backers. And it did. It was financed. And now anyone can buy it. But the whole strategy isn't there. You know, I release information on areas, but then don't set any relevant adventures there. I mean, we have the Warring Kingdoms one. I'm aware of one adventure that's set in the Warring Kingdoms, Ewiger Hass. I'm going to play in this. I've been fortunate enough to have applied for a space in a group that is going to play this. And I was accepted, and I'm very, very glad about this, and I'm very grateful to the GM. But that's one adventure for one book, for one source book. Now, why do you have a whole adventure path set in the Bornland and don't provide the source book for this? I just don't get it. Why would you do this? Because I know 2 of these books, and they don't give you a lot of insight into the area at all. None whatsoever, just some bits and pieces here and there. And it goes so far because the Bornland, for those of you who don't know, is based on Russia. So it's essentially Russia, politically speaking and regionally speaking. And when you go to the Ulisses PDF shop, the scriptorium, where fans can make their own content and provide it. There is a booklet made by a fan, and she writes, well, I'm Russian, and I've decided to actually take the Bornland and put my Russian knowledge on it, turn it into something that is based on DSA. So she has brought in the 12 gods, and basically related them and related Russian customs of the 19th century to that. It's wonderfully done. I think it's 20 or so pages. It's a great read. It actually breathes life into the Bornland, but it was made by a fan. It wasn't made by Ulysses, and this is what I don't get. And so I'm a bit uncertain as to where DSA is going, especially since I think it was last year, 2017, no, sorry, 2 years ago, I believe, the news came out that Ulysses was going to be the publisher for D&D German, 5th edition. And now in 2019, not that much has been published there either. They've got the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Guide, but I don't think Saltmarsh is coming out. I haven't seen that. I think they've got one or two, I think the Bestiary has been translated, but I looked at the offering and it's very, very small. There are maybe 5 or 6 items there, and some of them are the cards as well. So the cards are just incidental. You don't need them. You can play easily without them. It's the adventure parts. It's the adventure books that count, that make people interested. They're not there either. So I'm not quite sure what their policy is. I think that they may be spreading themselves too thin. And I'm not saying that because they picked up D&D, DSA is now suffering, because I understand that they are completely separate. Even the groups that are working on them are completely separate. So I'm not saying that. There were those people who criticized Ulysses for bringing out the crowdfunding Wege der Vereinigung and believed that this led to other things not being published or being delayed. And I honestly didn't really pay any attention back then because I wasn't playing DSA at the time, so I don't know if this is really true. But when I look at this, I'm just wondering, why are they doing it this way? Because they have one big... interestingly enough, and this is something that I didn't know, but I've only learned this over the last couple of weeks. D&D isn't big in Germany. I knew it wasn't the best selling of all of the role-playing games, but I didn't realize that the offering is so small. I thought that everything that was available in English was also available in German at the very same time. I really didn't realize that Wizards of the Coast hadn't really started D&D 5th edition in German until only 2 years ago. And that most of the big adventure books have not been translated. I mean, the offering is really small. There could be a couple of reasons. Number one, the level of English in Germany is extremely high. So most people who are on the nerd spectrum have enough English to read D&D books in the original. So it could well be that they're not going to buy the German version. Add to that the fact that the German books are a lot more expensive than the English versions. If I can read it in English and if I'm going to save 10 euros per book, once I've bought 5 books, I can buy... once I've bought 4 books, I can buy a 5th for free, especially since they are readily available. It's not a problem. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them from the UK. You can even buy them in the United States if you like. So it's not a problem. You can get them easily. So that could be one reason. But the one thing that they have probably neglected is the fact that there is Splittermond. And Splittermond has been around for several years now. I did an introduction on my channel as well. Some of the people working on Splittermond used to work on the DSA editorial team. And apparently there was a falling out. From what I heard, somebody was sacked, but it was said that they left because they wanted to finish their studies, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody said, oh, no, that's a lie. And suddenly they popped up in Splittermond again. And I don't know the details. I just read things on blogs and I was like, okay, well, that's weird. But anyways, and that is different from DSA, but not that different. It's different in that it's a lot younger. So it hasn't been around for 30 years, but they've been around, I want to say maybe for 5 years now, 2014, 2013, so 6 years. But they're putting out so much good stuff, and you've got lots of different things. You've got your novels, you've got your basic rule book, which is available for free. You can download the PDF, it's 400 pages almost, but if you print this off and have it bound, you know, you're good to go. You don't have to invest. You can get it as a paperback for 20 euros. So if you say, yeah, I want it, but I don't want the hardcover for 40 euros, you can always get the soft cover for 20, which is still, in my opinion, a lot nicer than printing off the PDF yourself. But even, you know, if you want to do that, you're fine. You've got the World Book, which is not essentially, you don't need it for playing, but it is nice. I've got it, and it's really an interesting read. Then you've got all of the adventures that have been coming out. You have lots of source books, and I think I've got 2 or 3 of the source books simply because I wanted to read them, simply because I was interested in those regions, and I was kind of eclectic. I just took the ones that I felt were interesting. If I was really going to play, and as you all know, I had found a group, but then the group never played because suddenly the GM vanished. Like, really, he vanished into thin air. So I've got all the books and I can't play, but hey, that's fine. But I think that this could really become dangerous to DSA. Because it is very German in its approach to things. It's very rules heavy. It's probably in some cases even more like a simulation, especially in its combat, where you have weapon speed and everything. And where you have like a turn track, where depending on your speed, your little token gets moved. So it's actually a visual representation of initiative, which I really like. So it will appeal to a lot of people like myself who are tactical players. And then, of course, you always still have Midgard. Midgard is Germany's oldest role-playing game. It predates DSA, I think, by a year or so. And they're still going strong. And they have also released a 5th edition. A couple of years ago, they released it. And although that's a lot less reach, but the people who play Midgard. They are Midgard. It's a very, very strong community. So I'm not really sure what they're playing at. And I also don't understand why they have stopped supporting DSA 4.1, because these books can still be used. I mean, this information, because of the way the metaplot works, they will not alter the past. Still works. I mean, all of this is still relevant. These are people that you can talk about, that you can read about. The only thing that would need to be changed, if they have stats, and most of them don't, because this is really just fluff, there is hardly any crunch in here, is still relevant. There is nothing in here that you can't use for DSA 5, because this is just information. It's lots of information, but it is just that. It's fluff. Like the Historia Aventurica, I don't understand why they're not going to reprint it or update it. I totally don't get it. And especially since there should be a very easy way, and it's called print on demand. This I got through the DM Guild. And it is Beyond the Crystal Cave, which is an adventure for characters of 1st to 3rd level for for Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, Dungeons and Dragons Encounters. They also have the books, and they're bringing out more and more and more on print on demand, even in hardcover, and also for DSA 3. Dungeons and Dragons, AD&D. D&D 3.5, it's all there. You can get it. They have been continuously re-releasing stuff, even very, very old stuff, in print on demand. And if you go to Seth Sikowski's or Draven Swiftbow's channels, you can see some of these print on demand versions, because they buy them and showcase them. So this would be something that they could easily do. The format is a bit off. It's less than A4, but you know, it's the quality is really good. I ordered this and I got it like 3 days later. And you know, it's also not watermarked, so it is good enough. And I would prefer this to paying just for a PDF. So if they said, okay, you can have the PDF, I think the PDF for these 3 books, it's 3 PDFs, I think was bundled for 30 euros. If they say you can have this as print on demand for 50 or as a bundle of PDFs for 30, I would have said, okay, not a problem, I'm going to pay. All of my Changeling the Lost books were print on demand. They were hardcover. They came in excellent condition. I don't really understand why they're not availing of this, because this would be an easy way out. They wouldn't have to stock these anymore, of course, because that's also a problem. They have a warehouse, and if you have all of this stuff, and maybe some people don't want to read it because they don't realize that it's relevant for DSA 5 as well, it cuts down on warehousing, and they don't run any risks. So I don't really understand, since they're so big on Kickstarter, why they don't embrace print on demand. So that's my thoughts on DSA, TDE, Quo Vadis, as it were. And, you know, 2019 is almost half over. My God. And I don't even know about a release schedule. I looked. I couldn't find anything about upcoming adventures, anything about, you know, where Uturia is headed. I've got no idea. I just know that Muranor is no longer with Uhrwerk. God knows what they're planning for that. I have no idea if they're going to release any additional source books, or if there's going to be another adventure path, as it were. And for somebody who's actually quite invested in this and spends a lot of time on the internet researching things, looking at, you know, like their website and, you know, reading blogs and stuff, that's actually quite terrible, because if I, as somebody who's invested in this, finds it difficult to know where the journey goes, if somebody's casually interested and would like to know where to go, what to do, well, oh yeah, it's got a bestiary as well. So if you've got this, maybe don't buy a bestiary, because the bestiary itself is actually quite a bad book. If even somebody who spends a lot of time on DSA doesn't really understand where the journey goes and where we're at and what we're doing, I doubt that you will be able to catch somebody who is unaware of the system and has just caught a glimpse. So my final words and thoughts are, I don't think that TDE is going to continue. I think they've already mentally discontinued it. With regard to DSA German, I honestly don't know, because one thing that also sells well are the retro boxes, where they just re-release very old stuff, even from DSA 1. And that makes you wonder, doesn't it? So with those thoughts, I'll leave you and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.